Is the children's ministry just not having enough volunteers? What about a parking team? What about youth ministry?
I don't think that our church is short on willing people.
So many different ways where there's needs in the church that may be going unmet, or usually they're not going unmet. It's like some diligent person is doing 12 things, they're getting tired and burned out.
How do you take the faithful, capable, gifted people and help them take ownership in your church? It is really good to be with you from Greater Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us. And as we start, I just want to say a thing, and that is that John and I are not ministry professionals. That's not the angle that we're coming at today to talk with you. We're not church consultants. We're not pastors. John's not a pastor. I am not a pastor. What we are is lay people who are lay leaders who have been mobilized. And that's what we're talking about here today. We're talking about raising up a church full of leaders and mobilizing leaders in your church. And as we get going, I want to tell you a story. This is the mobilization story, and it's a true story about Kenny. So Kenny is a tall, lanky guy from Philadelphia who grew up, and his heart was full for the gospel, for Jesus, and for being a pastor. It was the desire of his heart to be a pastor and in pastoral ministry. So he got some training. He became a pastor at age 30 in 1998. He joined a pastoral staff in Greater Philadelphia, a really big one, so that after 10 years of really wonderful, happy ministry at this really large church, they wanted to plant a church in a neighboring community. So Kenny was to lead that church plant. So he came to our town, where we live, in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, and planted a church 15 years ago. I'm sure there's church planters or people who are familiar with church planting in this room. And so you know that for the next 10 years, Kenny did everything. He preached on Sunday mornings. He taught Bible studies. He led prayer meetings. He managed crises. He ran big events at Christmas and Easter, and he counseled couples and did the baptisms, and he was at meetings every night of the week, which a lot of you do that too, so that makes sense to you. And then the church began to grow, which was wonderful. So over 10 years, the church started to become a mid-sized church, and it began to approach 400 people. And as you all know, with 400 more people came 400 more sets of issues, good and challenging. There were more marital struggles. There was more relational drama. There were more expectations. There was more criticism. There was more wonderful things. There were more new believers, which meant more baptisms and more new members and new member classes and all of the things, on top of the wonderful birthday parties and graduations. So over the course of 10 years, Kenny began to walk into church with a longer and longer mental checklist. And it became sort of defeating because it was utterly impossible to get it done. It felt like everything was on his shoulders. He would walk into church and think, wait, who's missing? What's broken? What's not done? What's not going to get done this week? And after 10 years, he hit a wall. And he had the passion that he always had for Christ and for the gospel and for just sharing the grace of God with new people and seeing people get saved. He had the passion, but the energy was gone, and there was a growing weariness and even a looming burnout. And the burnout was real. Enter Sarah. Sarah was a woman in the church. Before she had kids, she was an administrator at a local college, so she had skills, organizational skills. Nobody really knew how deep her organizational skills really were, but she was Kenny and there was two pastors, Jason and David. They were really desperate, and they said, "You have skills," and they tapped Sarah and said, "Can you help?" And Sarah said, yeah, I can help. But something interesting happened because Sarah didn't just volunteer and start helping, she began leading. She started to create systems for the operations of our church. And then within the system, she began building teams to implement the systems. And she took ownership of real parts of our church's operations, and everything began to change because all of a sudden, for the first time, Kenny and David and Jason weren't doing everything. There were other people that were stepping up. And Kenny realized, he said, I actually don't think our church is short on gifted people. And I don't think that our church is short on willing people, but I think we are short on mobilized people. So Sarah's team continued to grow, and they started doing more. And so the pastor said, let's look around and see if there's more Sarahs. And they did look, and they did find them. Anthony, who worked at Vanguard, he took over the church finances. And Mary had bookkeeping skills, and she took over the church's bookkeeping. And Ralph was a handyman who was able to handle the maintenance of the building. They found me. I'm a professional writer. I was able to take over the church's communication needs. And Vicki managed the graphics. And John stepped in to coach the pastors on organizational leadership. And Amanda took over the guest initiatives, which we had none. We had nothing for guests before that point. So she took it over. And Jeff, who's an artist, began to spearhead everything that was creative projects. And even we have 2 retired florists who took over the landscaping. I could stand here all day with the list, what has happened over time. But suddenly it wasn't just a few staff people doing everything. It was actually a church full of leaders, each owning a part of the mission and building teams. And that is what mobilization looks like. It doesn't just lighten the load of the leadership. It really, really transforms the church, because when people move from passive participation, attending, but passive participation, into active ownership, the church doesn't just get more efficient. It does get more efficient. But not just that, the church gets stronger. And the strength grows deeper because each person becomes a pillar holding up the weight of the ministry. And then something happens. There's a secret sauce there that makes the church begin to grow. And it grows exponentially because of the depth of the pillars of people leading. So let me circle back to Kenny. What happened to him? Well, he didn't just survive ministry burnout. He began to lead with joy again for the first time in a long time. Amen. So mobilization took root in the church, and then there was another shift. So people stepped up and they took ownership, but then because they had ownership, they began to build teams. So Anthony was doing the finances, but then he built a team of people who understand financial things. And they started to look ahead and say, well, could we retire our debt? What about the mortgage? What about savings? What about financial planning? And they made those charts that none of us can understand and talked about them. And I sent them out in the church, email, I don't know, good luck with this. But there was a team, and Anthony was running it, and he was accountable. And Sarah was not waiting for micromanagement or any kind of direction. She was leading her team of operations, and things began to run so smoothly. And Ralph, who understands maintenance things, he got a team of people who understand things like HVAC and plumbing and the age of roofing and another pile of stuff that the rest of us don't know. But Ralph did, and he ran a team so that they weren't just fixing broken things, they were looking ahead to see, well, what can we do before our HVAC totally shuts down? And one of the hugest changes, a gospel change, was what Amanda did with guest connection. She developed a team of greeters. They were everywhere. She tapped people who were naturally friendly and like good with names. So they were greeting people and then following up with them during the week and serving them, finding out. They had like little prayer carts and a whole new station she had it built where guests came and got like a really good gift, the kind you actually want. And the beautiful thing is that guests felt welcome, so they kept coming, and they heard the gospel, and they got saved, and they were baptized, and then added as new believers and new members into the church. So much so that we just had to tear down our auditorium and rebuild it because we can't fit the people. My dad he's a construction guy, he headed up a team that tore it out and replaced it because we need 100 more seats. We have an overflow that's getting too full. So I took over the church communications, but we didn't stop there. You know, our church email was a Google Doc from a Gmail. And so this is what I do. So I made one of those schmancy, like colorful MailChimp ones that went out that everybody actually reads because it's clever and interesting and people are actually informed and showing up and participating. It was a way that I could really, really help. But then my team, we expanded. We went through like the new members material and all the literature of the church and we upgraded it. We professionally edited it so that we're doing things with excellence, which really reflects Jesus, the King that we serve. And Vicki took over the graphics, and what a world. And John has been coaching the leadership team on scaling up because the church is not a business, but it is an organization, and scaling is challenging for organizations. Well, back to Kenny, he walked into church so much lighter. And for the first time in years, he had margin. He had margin to do what God had called him to do, his part of the mission, which, as the lead pastor, is to pray, to preach, to teach, to shepherd the people, and to cast vision for the church. And instead of holding the whole thing together with bubble gum and duct tape and willpower, he was watching the church function as a body, with every part doing its work with excellence, people owning the mission, and it changed everything. So Kenny has been in ministry since 1998. That's 27 years today. And he is happier today, day after day after day, happier today than he has been in 27 years of ministry. And I'm married to him. So I'm a witness of this journey and this transformation. So you came here because you're saying, okay, well, how do we do it? How do we get people involved? How do we lighten the load but not lower the bar? How do we raise up real leaders who, not just volunteers? Well, you are in the right place because that is why we wrote the Nehemiah Way, to help everyday churchgoers like me and John become engaged, mobilized, empowered, and mission-minded leaders in the church. And like Jeremy said, it's not a theory. That doesn't really, pie in the sky and ivory towers don't really help you all. We need practice. So we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about how to move the people from the sidelines to the front lines. How do you take the faithful, capable, gifted people that are showing up to your church every week and help them take ownership and leadership in your church? Because you really do have them. You really do have people who love Jesus, who love you, their leaders, love the church family, love the gospel, love the Bible, and they're showing up but they're not leading, and they might not even know that there's something more that they can step into. So John and I are here to say that we really believe that the church does not have a volunteer problem. The church really does have a mobilization problem and a mobilization opportunity. And that's why we wrote the Nehemiah Way. It's a blueprint. So the thesis of the book and the thesis of our talk today, that's like writer nerd talk, the main idea of what we're saying today is that mobilizing lay people into leaders rather than managing volunteers is the key to building a joy-filled, gospel-advancing church. And the story of Nehemiah gives us a biblical blueprint for how ordinary people can be invited, empowered to own the mission and to lead with purpose. So let's just circle back to those people that are sitting in your chairs again, and I'm sure that their faces are already swimming in your heads because you love them. And for today's sake, just for a minute, we'll call them pew potatoes. I know nobody has pews, but it starts with P and, couch potato, pew potato. So the thing is, though, that pew potatoes are not bad people. They're actually usually really wonderful people who love God and love you and love the church and are willing to help if they're asked. They're present, but they're passive. And they're gifted, but underutilized. They're willing, but not yet leading. They're showing up. They even might serve on occasion, but they're not fully engaged and don't know how to be that. And contrast the pew potatoes with mission mobilizers. And these are the people that I was describing, Anthony and Amanda and Sarah. These are the people who are building your church. They're committed to the mission because they're relational, they're initiative taking, and they're accountable. They don't need to be asked every time to take responsibility. They say, this is my church, and I have a role to play here. So the difference between the pew potatoes and the mission mobilizers is not personality. It's not even gifting. It is mobilization. It's a shift in the mindset of the leaders. It's a shift into invitation towards ownership. And it's all of you having a plan, a blueprint to help people step into leadership, sometimes for the very first time. And John and I are living proof of that shift. Someone saw something in us, tapped us, invited us in, and equipped us to become leaders. And that's what we're really envisioning for you all today. So, most churches are not struggling because they lack willing people. They are struggling because they don't have a plan. So you all have heard the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the people are doing like 80% of the work, and the rest of the people are just doing a little bit of the work. And I'm kind of guessing that if you showed up here for this morning, that resonates with you. Anybody? Is that yes, hands are going up everywhere, right? That's your experience. And that's really common. We have been there too. And maybe you're in a worse place, like maybe you're in that 90-10, where you've got 10% of the people doing everything, and burnout is looming over you, like it was for Kenny. Maybe you have a little bit better situation. Maybe you're that 30-70, where you've got 30%. But wherever you are, you're in a good place because there is a way forward. There's a real way forward, and it's good news. And there's growth for all of us. So that is the outcome that we long to see for you and for your church, because when pastors don't burn out and when people lead, pastors thrive. And that's what we want for you. That has been our experience at Brandywine Grace Church. Our church is flourishing, and it's growing in maturity, and it's growing numerically in leaps and bounds. And I really believe that you're already surrounded by potential leaders. You just haven't tapped into them yet, and it's not guesswork. It is a blueprint. So it's also exactly what we see in the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah did not start with a dream team. I mean, he did start with like a ragtag, scattered bunch of people, just like the people in all of our churches. And by the end, though, they were not a rabble crowd. They were leaders, they were builders, they were a team, they were mission mobilizers. So, how did Nehemiah do it? And very importantly, how can you do it? John is going to take us there. John.
Well, Amy let the cat out of the bag. I'm not a pastor. I feel like true confessions here, right? So my name's John. I I was in the technology industry for over 20 years, so I was a pew potato for sure. I spent a lot of time showing up Sunday morning and then heading back out. And somewhere along the line, someone said to me, hey, can you help us out? We heard you do organizational consulting. Can you do a retreat with us? And the pastors asked me to do that. And then we spent a retreat, and then years went by, and then somebody said, hey, can you do a workshop? Can you help us with some leadership development? So I did that. A couple years went by. And it's really fun now to see, and I don't think that those things were the big contributors. There's all these people in our church that stepped up, Sarah, Amanda, all the people that Amy just mentioned. And they just took ownership of some of these things. So just really, really interesting to see. I should say, we're not a perfect church. We got all the problems that every church does. But it is just really different experiencing it now I was there from very early on after the church plant, and it was like a church plant getting started. And looking at this last Sunday, I walked to the park because we were doing our church at the park for Easter Sunday, and over 600 people showed up. We have 350 or so people in our church, so the community showed up. And it was massive. There were donuts and coffee for everyone. There were prizes and games for the kids. There was the sound system was up and working. Even though it was windy, everything was really going to plan. I heard from Amanda over 100 volunteers from our church were involved with that, making that day happen. Did you just hear Amy mention we're in the process of renovating the church right now? We had to actually meet in the park on Sunday because the stage was unusable. It was in the last days. Over 50 people involved in that. So that's what a mobilized church looks like. And it's just amazing to see what God is doing with a lot of very ordinary people doing very uncommon things. So I'll never forget the day we were all sitting in the community room of our church. The room, a little smaller than this room, has half a dozen tables in it. And hands went up. Everybody put their hands up. I had just asked the question, what's the book of Nehemiah about? And before I could call on anybody, Beth blurted out, she's like, it's about a wall. And everyone else kind of started chiming in, similar things. Different people said it's about a wall. Matt confessed, he's like, I have never read the book of Nehemiah. I have no idea what this book is about. And so then, Andy, who just recently retired, plays the bass for our worship team, started regaling us with stories of flannel graphs and paper cutouts. And those of you who are Gen Xers in the room are chuckling. The rest of you are like, what are you talking about? So, we have all these different things. And John and Lauren and Travis and Tom and Rebecca all chiming in, and all had a similar thing to say about, Nehemiah. That's an account of somebody built the wall. Here's the thing. It's not about the wall. So often, we just think what we're doing in our church is what it's about. But look at the book of Nehemiah. Everybody talks about the wall. It's not about the wall. So let me talk about that 80-20 problem in the church. It's funny. I saw a lot of you raise your hands. You're like, I resonate with that. I'm kind of thinking some of you are probably 20% would be great. I don't know, raise your hand if you're in that category. All right? So today I want to share 6 steps to mobilizing a church full of leaders. And that's really what we're breaking down in the book of Nehemiah. And it is a blueprint, as I like to call it. That's the Nehemiah way. So let's dive in. Step 1, prayer. Mobilization begins on our knees. And Nehemiah shows this right out of the gate. If you read in chapter 1, you're reading Nehemiah's prayer. You're reading this breakdown of what does a prayer look like. In the book, there are 8 parts to it. We don't have 2 hours, so I'm not going to try to go through all those this morning. I'm going to give you kind of the 3 highlights, and we'll double click on those. But one thing that really convicted me when I started digging into this prayer, and I started breaking it down, kind of academically. I teach at a university, so I look at this prayer. There are 8 things that Nehemiah very clearly does in this prayer. The last one is, you can call it supplication for aid or petition. It's basically ask for something. When I think about the way I pray, I'm like all number 8 all day long. And I'm like, not for good things, not for important things. It's like, God, please let that yellow light stay a little bit longer because there's a police car on the other side. You know what I'm talking about. It's like he's really shows a lot of depth in this prayer. So what did Nehemiah do? Nehemiah carefully crafted a prayer. carefully crafted a prayer. It was very thoughtful. It had a lot of attention to detail. I'm gonna double click on three things: adoration, repentance, and petition. Because those are the things that you really see that are really critical. Is Nehemiah is praising God through his prayers. That adoration is showing through. Confession. He's putting some deep stuff on the table. And he's not saying conceptually, sin is bad, right? It's not conceptual. He's like, my sin, me personally, my family, my group around me, the nation. Confession, repentance. And then petition. That comes later. That comes at the end. Now, why do I say I think this was really carefully crafted? Couple reasons. Nehemiah was kind of a nerd, right? And you look at every detail, it was meticulously captured. Most people don't like to read Nehemiah because it seems like a boring, bureaucratic account of a bunch of events. And so it can look that way. And until you dig beneath the surface, you don't see this like action-packed geopolitical spy thriller that is like unfolding in real time, right? It's all there, but sometimes it gets a little lost. Somebody in the group, when I ask, what is Nehemiah about? They're like, isn't it like Ezra part 2 with a bunch of names nobody can pronounce? It's like, yeah, kind of, but not if you dig in. So what can you do? Pray with purpose. And this is where, spend some time actually writing out the prayer. So here's a little, one of these little things, you dig in a little bit in Nehemiah and you realize, I kind of initially had this impression that Nehemiah's brother shows up, says, wow, Jerusalem's a mess. Nehemiah gets really upset about it, shoots up a prayer, heads into the king. The king's like, what's up? You look sad. Hey, I got this problem. Can you send me over there to fix this wall? That's kind of the way it feels. But at the beginning of chapter 1, it says the month of Chislev. Okay? That probably doesn't mean much to most of us. It didn't mean anything to me until I started digging into it. Well, at the beginning of chapter 2, it's the month of Nisan. Well, Chislev is November, late fall time frame. The month of Nisan is now, April, March, April. Almost 5 months goes by. What is going on for 5 months in between? Well, for one thing, I'm thinking he's spending a lot of time thinking about how he's praying about this. Because he didn't just randomly start talking and see what words came out of his mouth. I got to tell you, that's kind of how I pray. It's kind of embarrassing sometimes. He spent some time putting this prayer together. And I would say it may have even been a daily meditation. He put some real thought into what this prayer was. Because he had no idea when the king was going to call him and give him an opportunity. He didn't even know for sure that was going to happen, but he trusted God was going to give him that moment. He was just diligently praying every day, and the moment came when it came. So that's what you can do. Or what can you do is pray with purpose, develop a laser-focused prayer. There's that 8-part framework can be like a workshop. Get your leadership team together, bring out the whiteboard and say, let's start with number 1. And let's say, what would we do? That would be an interesting exercise. Everybody go make a draft of this and put it together. Throw it into ChatGPT. It's what all my students do. All right. So mobilization starts on our knees rather than our feet. Pray first, then take action. That's what Nehemiah did. And that takes us to step 2, which is planning. Mobilization needs a map. That's what I mean by planning. When I say planning, I mean Nehemiah had a pitch deck. All right, so the entrepreneurship professor just jumped out. I'm like, here it is. If you've ever seen Shark Tank, you probably know what a pitch deck is, whether you know it or not. It's that slide deck that every entrepreneur puts up and says, hey, I've got a plan. It's going to create something really good, and you should invest money in me, right? That's a pitch deck. That's what they do with the sharks on Shark Tank. Nehemiah had a pitch deck. What did he do? It basically revealed he had a very specific plan for how the problem in Jerusalem could be addressed. So what did Nehemiah do? He developed this thorough plan. He identified the problem. He scoped out the work. He identified the positive impact it would have if they went forward with this. He outlined the people, the materials, the money that would be needed, the authorization. He had this all together. He had the plan ready to go. So what can you do? Build a plan and pray. That and pray, you can pretty much attach that to every one of these. So if you want to work ahead in your notes, say and pray, because that's what we're going to do. You can build a plan and pray. What critical needs is God calling to mind for you? So is the children's ministry just not having enough volunteers? Amanda put together a program to kind of just help greet guests on the way in. We hadn't given any thought to that. What about a parking team? What about youth ministry? So many different ways where there's needs in the church that may be going unmet, or usually they're not going unmet. It's like some diligent person is doing 12 things and they're getting tired and burned out. What is the gospel connection to what this is? That's critical. So then I would say identify some capable pew potatoes and get them in a room. Say, hey, here's a problem. Let's work through this. That's what we do with our workshop. And I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. So Dwight Eisenhower famously said in a very public document at one point, plans are useless, but planning is everything. And we see Nehemiah did not go short on planning. That 5 months is pretty important. He's praying for 5 months. He's planning for 5 months. And he's basically putting together that pitch deck with intensity. His planning also revealed a secret in the book of Nehemiah that very few people catch. And that's number 3, preparation. Mobilization requires setup. Getting things ready. So what do I mean? Preparation is getting everything ready before you get started. That sounds really logical, doesn't it? How often do we get started? What's the expression? Ready, fire, aim? We've heard it, right? So what did Nehemiah do? Nehemiah had preparation more than halfway done because of his planning. One of the things that, even in, as we're working through the book, it's like, how do we distinguish planning and preparation? They seem like this mess of things that just kind of intertwine with each other. It's because they were happening, a lot of it was happening at the same time. Some preparation you can't do until you're in motion. But a lot of preparation you do before, and you can't plan well until you're prepared. And so these things are happening a lot at the same time. Counting the costs, working out the logistics, accounting for opposition. Guess what? Nehemiah dealt really, really well with Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem when they showed up. Why? He had read their playbook. They did it before to Ezra. It was on public record. He probably had their letters. I suspect, I would speculate a little bit, he maybe even had the response letters written before he headed for Jerusalem. So you see this preparation, like getting everything ready, everything in place. So what can you do? This is where bring the pew potatoes, bring people that could really be champions into the process. We call this a cornerstone project. So we did a series of workshops. It was about 6 weeks long or 8 weeks long. And we asked the pastors, hey, is there a problem we could work on? Like, what's really gnawing at you is I really should be doing something about that. I just don't have the time, the energy, the bandwidth to do something about it. Can we chew on that? We're going to bring like a dozen leaders, people who are capable leaders into a room, and we're going to talk about Nehemiah, but why don't we just actually do some work? And that's what we did. We did a cornerstone project. And don't forget to pray. So identify a project and pray. So Nehemiah prepared everything. So when he got the nod, he was ready to go. Susa, or Shushan, as it's usually pronounced, was the winter capital. And that's where they were at this time. Remember I said the month of Nisan? Getting hot. I was in the UAE a few weeks ago. I got to be there while it was still cool. It was only like 90 or 92, or some small number that they said that did not sound right to me. I was thinking, man, I am only a few hundred miles away from Susa, or Shushan. It's like, it's no wonder they were getting ready to pack up and head north, right? Nehemiah had a window to get out of Dodge. If he was going to peel off towards Jerusalem, there was a window of time. God had everything figured out, as we know. So we got the nod, it was go time. And that takes us to step 4, which is progress. Mobilization moves. Sometimes we say mobilization in motion. So what do I mean? Progress is about mobilizing leaders who will mobilize others. I often call them champions. Just somebody who's got a group of people already around them. We mentioned Don Cole, who's organizing this massive construction project at our church. It's like, he has this group of, I think they call themselves the Optimist Club. They get together and do Bible studies, or fight clubs as we call them, and they work on cars, and they build stuff. And when it's time to do a project like that, you call one person. You call Don. Don's going to show up, and a dozen other people are going to be in tow, right? He's a champion. He has a natural serving circle around him. So, you have somebody that's already ready to be mobilized. You see the early church. They did this in the early church. Acts 6, 1 through 4. They mobilized deacons. You have 7 people who are asked to take over some of the tasks that were critical. They needed to care for the people right here, but they're like, hey, we got to teach the word. We got to keep moving the gospel forward. Let's get 7 people. One thing I've noticed in a lot of the writings of the New Testament in particular, like the order of the names can be kind of important. Who was the first name on that list? Stephen. I'm going to kind of guess Stephen wasn't just serving tables. First martyr. So what did Nehemiah do? Nehemiah distributed the work. Okay, if you want to see how this works, I'm going to ask you to do something really, really hard. Read Nehemiah chapter 3. Don't skip it. And if you've read Nehemiah chapter 3, you know what I'm talking about. And if you skip Nehemiah chapter 3, that's probably more likely. Because, why? You get into Nehemiah 3 and all of a sudden it's a long list of names that seem hard to pronounce. Like, this is looking a little bit like Leviticus. I think I'm going to hop to chapter 4 because things start to get interesting. Don't skip chapter 3. Because this is where we see how Nehemiah distributed the work. This is we see where Nehemiah, how he acknowledged the workers. And this is where we see how Nehemiah showed what great work God was doing. Don't skip chapter 3 because it's all right there. He divided the work into 46 segments. And I got to tell you, it was a huge tangle for me to figure this one out. And so if you want an easy lift in the book, I put in a chart because that's what I had to do before I could figure out exactly what's here. So you have 46 segments. Each one had a champion or an implied champion, and it identified a group of people that was working with them. So 46 segments. There's actually, you could look at it as there were kind of 7 kind of mega sections because there were these partitions between the gates. So all of a sudden you see a leadership structure starting to appear really quickly. And you might say, how on earth did they build a wall around an entire city in 52 days? It's all there. First, it was a 2-phase project. First project, let's get the foundation good. Let's get it up to 4 feet. Let's get it connected all the way around. Oh, by the way, let's make it smaller. The city is huge. Why don't we just do this little section over here? It's about 20%, way easier, way quicker. I bet we could do that in 52 days. He probably didn't have that quite counted. And then it's walls 4 feet high? That doesn't sound so bad. Phase 2, we'll go to 8 feet. But maybe everybody can kind of redistribute if we need to finish up different segments that aren't done. So about 300 feet per segment. So the math is there. It works out. But he recognizes and celebrates those that contributed to the work. He calls out the people that didn't. The nobles in that group, they were above the work. They're out, right? Hey, this whole family started. This guy, his family, his daughters, they were all in there laying bricks. Everybody was in. So what can you do? This is that bold project that mobilizes your group, your pew potatoes. That big group, that thing that can really mobilize everyone. And pray. Always there. So define the outcomes, establish phases, segments, champions, serving circles, needed resources. Define a timeline. And then get out of the way. Let it start, right? So progress is about unleashing accountable champions with a clear definition of done. That's really important, by the way. A project plan, a timeline, and get out of the way. If you start to have success, though, opposition's coming. We know it. We've all experienced it. You can count on things getting tough if it's starting to work. And that's where step number 5 comes in. Perseverance. Mobilization hits resistance. Always. Resistance will come, but perseverance is where you refuse to quit or you throw in the trowel. Sorry, dad joke, couldn't help it. It may come in the form of fatigue, frustration, setbacks, whatever it looks like in your congregation, in your world, it's coming. If what you're doing is working, it's coming. What did Nehemiah do? Nehemiah ignored the opposition. Or if he did respond, it was very brief. I'm doing a great work. I can't come down. These are people that aren't used to being dismissed by anyone, let alone some no-name we've never heard of. I'll bet the king will think he's trying to overthrow the throne. You have to think Nehemiah's sees these letters coming, you have no idea. You have no idea. right? Ridicule, innuendo, accusation, outward threats. Sword in hand, I can't come down. Armed conflict. You got to read between the lines a little bit. Like, this is like Lord of the Rings type stuff. The enemies are at the gates, literally. Because they're saying, we got to post guards. We got somebody holding a bundle of spears. Somebody's like, they're like got their sword on there, and they're laying bricks at the same time. Like, the enemy was right there, right over that wall. At 4 feet's looking pretty helpful now. It's like, if arrows start flying, we can at least duck and cover. What can you do? Scenario and contingency planning. Royal Dutch Shell, the oil company, predicted an oil crisis in the 1970s, 10 years before it happened, because they sat there and looked at the data and they built a plan for things that might happen, and they figured out that was a scenario. We can do the same thing in our church. Like, if you're doing a big project, you can already start to think about who's going to want to get in the way of this. Because somebody's going to want to get in the way of this. Some on purpose, some accidentally, some because it just feels like it feels uncomfortable, feels like change. Document what that opposition might look like and have a little playbook. It's way easier to deal with opposition when it's like, well, I knew that was coming, right? And that's why I think it was so easy for Nehemiah. He's like, well, I knew that was coming. He even knew who it was coming from and how it was coming, right? Usually we don't get that opportunity. So if you're advancing God's kingdom, resistance will come. And Nehemiah shows us how to persevere. But wait, there's more. The dreaded step 6. People problems. Okay, low-key, not going to lie, I'm seeing all kinds of little thought bubbles going up all around the room. I see faces. I see situations. I see awkwardness. I see those people that are really pursuing selfish ambition within the church for themselves rather than trying to move the gospel forward. I see it draining the life out of you. It's coming, right? People problems. Mobilization's messy because people are messy. I loved what Alistair said yesterday. He's like, the church brings together a group of people who are natural enemies to one another. What did Nehemiah do, right? Actually, 3-part play here. Pray, confront, pray. Nehemiah shows up with some righteous anger. What's he? He's shaking his coat. Dust is flying out. He's been laying bricks. He's been in the dust. He's like, what are you doing? Don't you know what we're doing here? We're building something. And it's not a wall. It's not about the wall. We're building something together. And he's like, and some of you in this room are tearing down the whole point. The rich were exploiting the poor. They were selling people from their own community into slavery because they were taking so much interest they couldn't pay it. And this wasn't like just like, hey, that's not cool. No, there's like, the Bible covers this. The Old Testament, like, this was already established. They knew they were off. And I know they knew they were off because when he confronted them, they immediately confessed, repented, and said, let's change this, right? Yeah, of course, you confront someone with their sin, and they're immediately like, oh, no problem. Yeah, let's change it, right? I mean, God was in this. You can see it. You can see it for sure. He has this righteous anger. This is the one time in the entire book where he calls the work to a full stop. Full stop. You know, he's getting threats, violence, all these things are happening. He's like, can't come down, can't stop, keep going, everybody, full stop. Like, not another brick. Like, just stop, put it down. Like, we got to talk. This has got to stop. And no one leaves this room until we fix it. That's what happened. I mean, you can imagine, like, all that's happened, all he's done to get here. And, man, I got to tell you, I'd be like, well, let's deal with this after we get the wall built. If he hadn't dealt with it right there, it never would have left them. So what can you do? All right. This is one of those things, I'm going to say this, but I know that I am not a pastor. And so I know that it's easy for me to say and hard to do. But it is address sin head on. It's uncomfortable. It's awkward. I mean, think about, like, usually it's inconvenient, no matter what. But what Nehemiah showed us is no matter how important we think the work is, or no matter what we think God's doing, it's like We can't let sin get a foothold, ever. Full stop. So what does that look like? Have the hard conversations. Probably start with a conversation with a group of leaders, elders. It's like, do we have something that's going on here that we're not addressing? Like, let's think that through for a minute. Like, are we missing something? But if it's identified, then build a plan. Prepare, execute, like get an idea in place of how you're going to go and address that before anything else, kind of distracts. So this side of heaven, there's just always going to be people problems. We know it. But this is the gospel moment, right? People are messy. People are sinful. That's why we need a Savior. It's not about the wall, right? That is our mission. It's the gospel we all desperately need. All right, so that's the 6 P's of mobilization, or as we call it, the Nehemiah Way. So here's my challenge to you. Get your leadership group together and just walk through these 6 P's. Like, what does this look like in our church? It really starts there. I mean, Nehemiah gave us a very practical playbook, and we can run that play really easily. So if you want some help with this, I put together a free resource guide that's there's a scanner on the back of the card. It's like, basically it's like a diagnostic, so it kind of can help get the conversation started. Like, let's just go through this thing. It's like, where are we as a church? Are we highly mobilized? Are we not mobilized at all? It kind of gives you some of those things. And then the second piece of it will give you like a checklist. Essentially like, okay, here's like a checklist we can follow to do that. There's also a reading plan. If you're going to draw everyone in to read Nehemiah, study Nehemiah, there's a 31-day reading plan that just kind of walks through. So those are, if you scan that, you can get that. There's also a YouTube channel. I've been starting to kind of go through and just break down some of the background of things that went into the book. So hopefully I've demonstrated today that Nehemiah gave us a blueprint to mobilize a church full of leaders. And hopefully some practical things. We got prayer, planning, preparation, progress, perseverance, and people problems. And really I would say the confidence to deal with people problems, because it's all there. He really lays it out for us. So this book of the Bible is not a dry administrative account the way we often think of it. There is so much there, but you do have to dig beneath the surface. And I'd encourage you to do that if you haven't at any point in the past. If you're feeling the intense stress of that 80-20 problem in your church, Nehemiah can be a very practical guide to mobilizing a church full of leaders. That's the Nehemiah Way.